All right, welcome everybody. This is SIG VMware. Today is October 25th, 2018, and we're gonna get started with some community updates. Steve is traveling today, and he's joining the call from a plane that is about to take off. So I'm gonna cover the community updates for this week. Steve, if you're still able to speak, if you want to add anything after I'm done, feel free. So there's not much happening in the community these days, except ramping up for KubeCon China, which is in about 2 weeks, I think, maybe 3 weeks from now. There's going to be a contributor summit, which is going to be for new contributors. And there's going to be a SIG docs face-to-face meeting, and in general, there's going to be some working groups around SIG docs. If anybody's going to be there, I think this is a good opportunity to mingle with people that are building the documentation skeleton for Kubernetes, and they're doing a lot of work. There was a nice update about an hour ago on the community call. They're doing a lot of work. They're doing a lot of work right now. They've been focusing on internationalization for other languages for Kubernetes.io in preparation for China as well. They do have a Chinese version of a website hosted inside China. There's a lot of work that these guys have been doing, and they're now focusing more on the documentation itself. They just released docs for 1.12, I believe. And, as part of this effort in getting documentation done in a much better structured way, there's a chance, given that most of the stuff right now is moving out of tree and we're working on a lot of these things, there's a chance of making an impact and making sure that the documentation for components that are not strictly inside the Kubernetes core but are also part of Kubernetes, like cloud provider, CSI, and cluster API as well, there's a chance to talk with these people and figure out what's the best way to have consistent documentation. Because right now we're mostly focusing on trying to get some documentation for developers that are trying out these new plugins that are still considered, some of them alpha, some of the beta, some of them are moving towards graduation, like CSI. So there's going to be a lot of effort, I think, next year in getting documentation properly done for all these components. So I think it's particularly important, both at KubeCon China and KubeCon Seattle. SIG docs are going to be there, and in Seattle there's going to be existing contributor summit, which is the place where every SIG is doing updates and getting together, doing some sort of unconference type of scenario where people can get together and start a new projects or get better at existing things they're doing. So just a thought on the docs, which I believe it's a pretty important thing. And this is really the only thing I have for the community updates. Steve, do you have anything you want to
add? No, nothing for me.
Okay, great. Well, safe trips, safe travels. I guess you're going to be taking off soon. So let's move on to the active projects update. We've been working a lot on Cluster API. I've been focusing on getting some of the work done for getting ready to have something that we can demo at KubeCon. Interestingly enough, there was a presentation, there was a demo and a community call right before this meeting on the Cluster API provider for AWS. There's a lot of new things that people have been doing around making sure that the plumbing to have a cluster, Kubernetes cluster ready on a specific platform, and the way that they're tackling the problem. Like, for example, a cluster API provider for AWS has a prerequisites of having to create some IAM roles that are specific to the AWS platform. So they created a cluster AWS ADM tool that is basically taking care of the plumbing. I think this is something similar to what we've been doing with cluster cloud provider effort, we had this VCP-CTL, which is a command that takes care of the plumbing for a cloud provider. I think this is going to be something we may want to look into for Cluster API too. Look, are you on a call?
Yeah, I'm on the call.
You want to give an update on what's going on in Cluster API vSphere?
Sure. So we're still working on end-to-end, getting end-to-end tests up. We're going to take two paths. One path is where we test the controller, and the other path is where, that is like using an existing Bootstrap cluster. And the second path is to test with Minikube, and so that we could test cluster CTL. We're not going to, we decided to go two paths because the testing with cluster CTL introduces the Minikube stack, and there's a lot of problems with that, and we don't want, PRs to be held up on that. So we're going to just run that on a periodic basis and use the end-to-end test that test the controller for PR submits. Fabio, you already talked about the stuff that you're working on. I am currently working on migrating the provider to CRD, the vSphere provider to CRD. So the main repo has already migrated to CRD, and a lot of the other provider repo have migrated to CRD. We're the last, maybe, I don't know about DigitalOcean, but we, right now, if you're using the Cluster API vSphere provider, the only way to test it is to use the old controllers from the main repo. And until we migrate to CRD, we can't use any of the new code, any of the new containers. Siddharth has made some great changes to the provider, the ability to do use static IPs from a pool and add multiple NICs. Siddharth, you want to add anything else you want to talk about? Additions to?
I can quickly talk about it a little bit, just summarizing like the things that you said, as you said, right? Support for static IP, that is there. However, there's a little caveat. Right now, there is no way in the upstream community to have a concept of an IP pool, wherein you can actually allocate static IPs automatically to the machine. I have an issue open on the Cluster API side, wherein I'm hoping that we can resolve that by introducing some sort of a concept of an IP pool, wherein once that happens, then one could actually create a machine set with the configuration where the static IP will be pushed to the machine, but the IPs will be allocated by some controller or some logic which allocates from the IP pool IPs to these machines for the machine set. So then essentially you will be able to go back to say, give me a machine set with let's say 5 replicas, and those 5 replicas will automatically get IPs assigned from a predefined IP pool. So that piece is missing. So at the moment, if you were to try out and use the IP static IP, the way you would want to do it is directly deal with machines and not use the machine set with replicas primarily for this reason. But otherwise, static IP is function I've been using and testing that, and that's working. That is working. The other thing is what so recently merged is a new specification of the virtual machine itself. So earlier you used to have the spec, and now which spec used to be like a simple hash map, but now it is a little bit more structured, and I'll definitely have everybody just take a look at that. That's it. Again, we can probably do more further refinements there, but that's a start at least. So we can have more control.
Okay.
That's about it, I think. Sorry for the
Siddharth, yeah.
I'm going to mute. Put myself on mute.
Yeah, Siddharth, also, I just want to comment, your microphone is really bad. I could hardly hear anything, but I want to add one last thing. There is there's either a Zoom meeting tomorrow or something. It was mentioned in the cluster lifecycle discussion about where should all of the community repos store their containers for testing and also for production. That's it's happening tomorrow. I can look that up, and I'm sure that you guys have probably already heard of it. If not, then I'll look it up and then post the information on the on SIG VMware.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Hey, Fabio.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question on Cluster API. So
Sure.
on one of the last TGI case from Heptio, Chris Nova was going through how to set up the Cluster API provider for AWS. And the seed mechanism there seems to be still Minikube. And I also just heard that from Log. So what is, like, on the long-term vision, what is our seed strategy for the control plane?
Right now, we're working on having an OVA for vSphere specifically.
Okay.
So the idea is that we actually shared that during the Cluster API vSphere meeting on Monday. But the idea is basically to have an OVA that starts up as and provision itself with kubeadm as a single node cluster. And then we use that single node cluster as the bootstrap cluster for Cluster API.
Cool.
And that's the initial idea. I think this is what we're trying to execute on for this quarter, and have the initial implementation like this one. Obviously, there's some concern around having a single VM to become the cluster that takes care of all the other clusters. It still remains to be seen if this is like a potential single point of failure or not in the management plane for Cluster API. But if we decide it's something we have to look into. But I think the deployment model still stands. I mean, definitely Minikube is not the way to go for using
exactly.
it. Yeah.
And quite frankly, it's even though this project has been going on for quite a while, it's really early. So anything that you see in the workflow today can and probably will change.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep. Cool. Let's move on from Cluster API, and let's give an update on what's going on with Cloud Provider vSphere. Cloud Provider vSphere has been a little bit quiet in the past few weeks. I guess for this quarter, we're targeting support for zones in the Auto-Tree provider, the same support that we added into Intree last quarter. Hopefully, we're going to have a more robust implementation of it. But this is pretty much it around what's going on there. And we don't expect to have new features on the Cloud Provider vSphere right now, because the scope of the cloud provider itself is more limited than what was previously considered a cloud provider inside KK. So I think we reached feature parity. We wanted to look into extending support for cloud provider for VMC, which is vSphere and AWS, specifically for supporting load balancers, given that vSphere itself doesn't have a load balancer facility, but VMC, given it's running on AWS, it has access to ELBs. So there's a potential to expand the load balancer functionality from the cloud provider into the external AWS services when you're running on VMC. So that was a possibility. I don't think we have a plan to actually implement that feature for Q4, given it's a very short quarter, and because there's Thanksgiving, there's Christmas, and there's KubeCons in between, and 1.13 is going to be released before KubeCon US, so it's a very short cycle this time. So there's no much there. Actually, there are other things going on in the same repo, namely CSI. Travis right now is attending SIG architecture, so he gave me a quick update that I can give you. He's been working on the initial scaffolding, which is right now in place. So we have a binary that can be generated. I think he added some tests as well. Right now, there's no logic inside the plugin, but there are some changes that have to be added to GoVMommy to support first-class disks. In order to, the CSI provider will be based on first-class disk when it comes to the API used for managing VMDKs on vSphere. So we're targeting 6.5 and upwards when it comes to versions. And there were some changes that had to be added to GoVMommy for first-class disk support. And everything is moving along, so there's no other major news around that. There is a plan to have a CSI plugin available for KubeCon, so KubeCon US, obviously. So I think we are, at most 4 or 5 weeks away from having actually working CSI plugin. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the project's update. Let's move on to the discussion phase.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I got 2 questions on Fabio, what you just said for the cloud provider for VMC. So this is going to be code like in the vSphere cloud provider, like out of 3, not a separate kind of module or extension point?
That is still to be decided. Actually, that's part of we have an issue open in the cloud provider repo that is calling for some explorations to be done on, in this specific regard. There's no decision yet. I mean, it could be like a separate provider altogether. It can be just an extension of the existing Auto3 cloud provider. Or maybe even we don't want to do it because I'm not entirely sure. I had a chat with Andrew. Andrew told me that, consuming services from AWS from within VMC is possible, and it's definitely a possibility, and he has been doing that for the CI/CD effort. But it's not like straightforward. Like you cannot use, like, for example, credentials from vSphere. You cannot share like the same credential between vSphere and AWS services. There are some caveats around that. So it may be even that we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to focus more on like an independent implementation of load balancers for vSphere. We were thinking about implementing like a load balancer based on on Nginx or other proxy servers. So it's yet to be seen. There's an issue around exploration in this area open. If there's anyone that wants to add more ideas to it, let me just look it up, and I'm going to link that in the meeting notes.
Yeah, please put it in, because the reason why I'm asking is that we still have the outstanding phase 2 implementation for zones, and so VMC would be actually the toughest architecture that we would have to address there. And so right now, if you want to deploy a highly available multi-AZ Kubernetes deployment on VMC, it's not really out of the box that we can do zones because of the nature of a VMC setup, which is a stretch cluster versus dedicated vSphere clusters, which we supported in the phase 1 implementation. So I'm going to throw that in the issue that you just posted as a potential that we can also explore the phase 2 implementation, because that's currently stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is really just trying to figure out what would be the best way to implement this in VMC. And you're right. I mean, even the zones implementation in VMC changes a lot, because zones implementation should be following zones from AWS and not like arbitrary zones that we decide. So yeah.
Yeah, this is probably something that I would bring up in the cloud provider vSphere meeting.
Cool. Yep. Yeah. Farhan, you had a question too?
Yeah, it's related to the zone. So when you say that the goal for Q4 is to have support for zones in the all 3 cloud provider, my guess is that you mean that it's the currently zone support that we have in tree, that is just for node labeling, but not for persistent volumes. Is that correct, or?
That is correct, yes. The support that we're in, basically it's going to be, so the outer tree cloud provider does not deal with volumes. It deals with placement of, it deals with load balancers potentially, and it deals with node reconciliation within the platform. So it serves as somebody that can tell the platform and Kubernetes which node is which one on the platform. So it's really not dealing with volumes anymore. What is dealing with volumes is the CSI plugin now. And actually, I heard from the SIG updates that SIG Storage did on the community call today that they're working on the topology aware volume deployment. Maybe I'm not using the right term here, but there's definitely work going on in the basically the volume placement that is attached to zones. And given that SIG Storage is pretty much doing everything on CSI, I will guess that this is an effort geared towards supporting this placement that we want to have for vSphere 2. I know Vlad is on the call. Vlad, do you have any updates on this for volume placement? Topology aware? It's probably stepped away from a computer. Anyway, so I don't have a specific answer for you, friend. I just know that the support we're targeting for, the support for zones we're targeting for Q4 in the cloud provider itself is just for the cloud provider, not for volumes. I think for volumes is going to be something for the next release cycle.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Okay, let's move to discussion. I do have one thing put on here, which is something that sparked my interest earlier this week while I was browsing through Slack, and I found out a link to a Reddit community. Honestly, I don't follow Reddit that much. I just see sometimes links to it. There's usually good discussions, but I don't know. It's a format I don't really follow that much. But it was interesting because people were comparing, products for Kubernetes and blah blah blah, and there were a lot of end users, including forgot his name, but he's the guy from Chick-fil-A, and it's the guy that was they made a blog post that was very interesting some months back on running Kubernetes cluster, like 3-node Kubernetes cluster at every store they have, which are a multitude. So they were basically running Kubernetes at the edge. It was an interesting use case. So while I was reading this thread, which was apparently very long, there were a lot of interesting comments from people using Kubernetes in production, or besides that, there were people using it on vSphere, using it on different platforms. There was a lot of interesting comments from users that are actually dealing with production issues and and what it takes to run a Kubernetes cluster in production every day. And some of them were running it on vSphere, and not all of them running it on PKIs or other commercial products. So it was interesting for me to see if we could engage more with these people, because sometimes I feel like we're missing the context of what we're doing, and we're building things that people may want to use in a different way. So I was wondering if, given that the VMware community is quite vast, and there's a lot of different places that people gather to get support and talk about things and so on. So I was wondering if would be a nice idea to maybe for us as a SIG to reach out to this forums and say, hey, we have a Slack channel, we have this bi-weekly meetings, we have this project that you should know about, and maybe join us. So I put two of the things that came up to mind. One of this is Reddit, because I saw this thread, and the other one is the VMware forums, because I remember looking at them and writing some posts, years back. But I don't know. I was wondering if you guys had any idea on how to get more involvement from end users of Kubernetes, especially on VMware products.
So
vMux.
the comment I have is, isn't SIG VMware mostly geared towards development?
It is. I mean, the work we're doing is mostly towards developing on Kubernetes, but you develop something that people end up using, right? So I'm thinking more about getting some validation, getting some creating a feedback loop from people using it. I mean, we had sometimes we had people joining from end users like T-Mobile. We had I remember a few folks that were interested in understanding better how it would be like a good best practice to run Kubernetes on vSphere, for example. And I feel like we're not engaging with the right people sometimes and not getting the right perspective on the things we're doing. I don't know. It was just a thought.
I agree, Fabio, and I would one of the channels we could use would be vMux, because they are more frequent, they are global. There's so many of them versus the vForums.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of activity within VMware and from the vMux leads in how this program should also move forward towards attracting not just vSphere admins, but service owners, developers, etc. So we could kind of maybe tie it into or link it up. If you want, I can link you to some of the CTO ambassadors at VMware who also have a lead on kind of the VMAC going forward. And this could be something that we could throw in there if you want.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, the idea here is to how do we engage these communities? How do we get people that are interested in running Kubernetes on vSphere or are already running Kubernetes on vSphere? Even if they're using commercial products, doesn't matter. I mean, we're all about making sure that VMware and vSphere is the best platform to run Kubernetes workloads. So how do we engage them? And vMux sounds like a good idea. I mean, if there's people speaking at these events, we can just if there's people interested in Kubernetes speaking at these events, mentioning the SIG, even participating in the SIG themselves, will be very nice. So thanks for signing up.
Will do, Fabio. I think
so I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Should we invite them to this, or should we invite ourselves to vMux? Right, because if this is to stay as a development, technical-oriented conversation, they may not understand the everything that's discussed here.
It's a good point. I think we have to set the right expectation. And I think we said this before. This is not like a support forum, and people should not just drop into the SIG VMware call and hey, we have a problem with running this, and that. While I think saying hey, we have a problem, we actually open an issue on your repo. I think that is fine. Just using this as a support channel, I don't think it works, but it works in getting this feedback loop I was hinting about, which is we're building something, we're building features, we're building support for things. Do people that actually run this in production care about what we're doing, or do they actually want to use it, or they prefer something else? Sometimes it's easy to lose perspective and not seeing what people really want to use. I don't know what would be the right term for this. I think it feels like a sort of I think feedback loop is probably the best word I could come up with. But
yeah, I think, Fabio, I think we don't have to be afraid of people waiting every 2 weeks to jump into the call and then open a support ticket. Because we still have the Slack channel, we have GitHub issues. We just have to raise awareness of what the SIG is and where the channels are. And the channels is not just this kind of bi-weekly Zoom meeting. So we got several channels into the SIG VMware. So we just have to raise awareness, because looking at the fact of the attendees of this call, it's mostly VMware people, and some of them have exposure to the field and end users of Kubernetes on vSphere, and but some don't. So I totally agree with you that this could be like sort of at the feedback loop and validation.
Yeah. Let's see how this goes. If it's if we get some traction from VMUGs, or from even just getting the word out at this venues. See if that is moving towards the right direction. I don't know. I mean, I'm just proposing this because I've seen that initially we had some of these people attending, and the discussions were kind of very interesting, because that perspective is very important when you're building something. Even if we're not building a product here, we're building we're building support basically. And I think it's nice to get that perspective when you're dealing with priorities or things like that.
So I have a suggestion here to engage more with users or developers. We maybe consider to write more documentation and associated with SIG VMware or associated with our repo, because I feel like maybe the two type of user. The first type is just very kind of a new user and start to evaluate. They're definitely looking for some get started documents, and I don't think we have that kind of documentation today to help people get started. And I think that's one way to actually kind of have some relationship here. Do we consider to have some project?
It's an interesting observation, and it's kind of similar to what I was hinting, on the opening on the call, when I was saying that SIG Docs is having a face-to-face meeting at KubeCon Shanghai, because SIG Docs is becoming, I think, extremely important for us, given that we're getting out of the initial scramble phase where we were trying to make sure that all the code is working properly, and now we're getting more into the phase where people are starting picking up what we're doing, and they're facing problems with the documentation that we have. And getting started guides are probably the best example of this. I mean, we do have some documentation out there, but the documentation we have is mainly, hey, this is a quick start. Let's
the meeting.
This is how you get things out of the ground. So yeah, this is a good point, Hui. I think we should actually you should take action on this, and I know you will be in Shanghai. I'll be there too, if my visa is approved. Yet pending, so I don't know. I will know probably next week. So I think it's a good opportunity to engage with them and make sure that we create great documentation, especially since we have we're not part of core anymore. Well, we're still part of core, but we won't be part of core for long. So we should make sure that we have a good documentation effort around all the auto tree components that we're building.
Yeah, I like the word great documentation. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's have a great documentation. Any more comments on this specific topic? Okay, I see there's another discussion point from you, Michael.
Yeah, this one goes back to kind of part what Farron was asking, but also what you were discussing in the Cloud Provider vSphere update. So I had an engineering meeting on the storage implementation for multi-zone. That's what Farron just was asking about, how we are dealing with this going forward. And so it looks pretty positive. There is a rough design proposal on how to fix the storage provisioning issue that we currently have in multi-AZ clusters, but just for in3. And there, a question came up regarding scalability of the current zones implementation, which is based on the nodes calling out to vCenter, which could be scalability bottleneck, and also security bottleneck, because the nodes would also have to have the credentials. And my question was, if we're going out of 3, and this is kind of a slightly different zones implementation there, like looking for the provider IDs, which goes channeled through the controller manager. Is there, like, what is the actual setup until a node becomes ready? Meaning that, will the node only become ready or show ready in the cluster when it gets the labels, or will it show ready before actually it gets the label because it's an asynchronous call?
I think the removal of the taint, which is the one that makes the node available, basically, I think it's yet to be defined. I don't think we actually started the implementation of it, but I will agree that, you know, from a technical standpoint, from an architectural standpoint, it makes sense that if you have zones enabled, because it's you know, it's not a required feature, it's an optional feature, right? You can turn it on or you cannot use it. So if you have zones set up in the configuration in the config map, and we go through the check if the actual zone exists, the actual label exists in vSphere, I think that will be a required step before we can actually untaint the node. So
Perfect.
Yeah, the node should be untainted only when the configuration is evaluated and considered correct.
Perfect. I wasn't aware of that we're in charge of untainting the node. So if
Yeah,
that's the case, that's good.
The Auto-Tree cloud providers, they have basically, when you start up the kubelet with cloud provider external, which is, you know, how you start up a kubelet and waiting for a cloud provider to initialize the node. When you start it up, before you start up the cloud provider, the CCM service, the node will be shown as not ready and tainted. In fact, there's a specific in the spec for when you run the CCM pod. There is a specific toleration specification that say you can run this pod even if the node has not been untainted, which is how you actually start it up.
Cool, awesome. Because that completely fixes some of the issues that there's currently in scheduling. Great. So sounds like well, switching to CCM, we don't have the scalability issues, no security issues, because everything runs through the central controller.
Yeah, it should be more straightforward.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, yes.
Perfect.
Awesome. We're running a bit early this time, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Do you guys have any other question or your comments you wanna make?
So I had another suggestion for how do we add more exposure to SIG VMware and its activities. I would suggest we participate in meetups, speak about our deliverables like Zone Support, demo it. People would see this work, and whoever wants to contribute, expand, will try to join the meetup. Whoever is interested in future deliverables will join the SIG attending. So yeah, we don't usually talk about our SIG work in the meetups a lot, I think.
That's a great suggestion, actually. I've heard that especially end user meetups are very popular. I'm not familiar with meetups. I mean, I've been a few of them, but I'm not like following, you know, the platform or so on. Do you know of any like good, you know, end users or even operation like?
I'm sure Michael would know some of good meetups in Europe. We have a meetup in Bay Area today in Pivotal Office.
Oh, great.
Pan Zhang from VMware is speaking. So And since VMware and Pivotal are hosting this, so it should be a good place to plug in the activities of SIG VMware.
Absolutely.
There is an SF meetup also, and I think Linux Foundation is now coming out and creating code of conduct for meetups under Kubernetes or CNCF. I need to clarify that, but there's a code of conduct and there are some recognized meetups, and all the meetup organizers are part of CNCF group. So there is a good focus in creating a formal chain of meetups that CNCF can, help set code of conducts, etc. And we can use that resource to find out which are the meetups that will help us reach more audience for SIG VMware.
Awesome. That's great.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I find myself like when I was looking for cool meetups to attend, for me it's very hard to figure out which ones are like active or well attended, or just things that people have set up like years ago and never got anywhere. So if there's a curated list of meetups that CNCF kind of is looking at or sponsoring somehow, it would be great to start from there.
Yeah, I'll look for that link and I'll share it on the Slack channel of SIG VMware. So
awesome.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Dewal.
So the thing about meetups, especially for the Kubernetes one, I think general topics like the one that Fan is doing today are, he's doing one on KubeBuilder that pertains to a wider audience. The SIG VMware, though, maybe some of the DevOps ones might be even more targeted.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm open to any suggestion. I mean, any well-attended meetups that has anything to do with DevOps or it's people running these workloads in production, I think would be fair game to engage them with some of our content.
Well, I did give a meetup presentation with cross-cloud CI. So it's with the help of Dewal. So Dewal is organizing that, and we did that. So yeah, generally it's like it's not very specific to VMware, but we do mention VMware, vSphere. And people, of course, they're interested in Kubernetes in general, but they do want to learn the practice of how we did. We have a kind of a reference implementation.
Yeah, and again, if you guys are speaking at any of these events or meetups or VMUGs or anything, if you're talking about Kubernetes and there's correlation with what we're doing here in SIG VMware, I mean, feel free to mention that we have a biweekly meeting and we have a Slack channel and so on. So people may be more even if they're just showing up on the channel asking for things, it's a good way to engage them. So I will appreciate it.
Fabio, I got a question on this topic. For some of the activities in VMware, like for example our sustainability campaign, they came up with a one slide that you can just pick and take into your presentation and then use instead of creating your own. So it's kind of maintained by this group. And I've seen some for our open source efforts because there's so many activities we do there, and so it's a kind of a maintained list. And I was thinking about, can we probably put either a PDF or an image or a PowerPoint on GitHub, even though that's not pretty common there, just so it's a one-pager that everyone can link into his presentation, and so the facts and the kind of the agenda of this SIG is in there, and you just grab it and put it in instead of sending around PowerPoints and putting in internal stuff.
That's a great idea. It's a great idea. I'm gonna take point and do this. I'll make sure to create something for this.
Cool, because then I could use that and put that into the VMUG leads in VMware for them to kind of reference, and so we have a central point on GitHub.
with information on SIG VMware to be used. All right. Good
You know, on
suggestion.
the back on the topic of meetups, you know, if we know who some of the companies in the Bay Area that uses VMware, I think like for instance, Uber is a VMware customer. I thought I heard that before, but you know, maybe we can reach out to some of those guys and do a
Oh yeah,
meetup together.
personal context, that's absolutely fine as well.
Well, I don't know who knows those who knows which company
Oh, you were just
VMware.
guessing.
Yeah, I'm just like I know there are some out there in the Bay Area. I just don't know who they are. We need to check the eSphere Analytic Cloud group. Get a list of those companies.
Yeah, if you
Okay.
guys need my help in that, just reach out. If you, yeah, I can help you organize that. And since I also manage the Bay Area Kubernetes meetup, and I know how Linux Fund, how CNCF is working towards it, we can host, sponsor, and find ways to educate people on what good activities SIG VMware is doing.
Awesome. All right, guys. Anything else? All right, we're finishing 9 minutes early. So, all right, going once, going twice. All right. Happy Thursday.
Dear.
All right, goodbye.
All right.
Thanks, guys.